Her flight had been delayed 3 hours, like so many others departing JFK International Airport on a Tuesday afternoon when thunderstorms had paralyzed air traffic across the Northeast. Captain Mia Tanaka, 38 years old and carrying the invisible weight of 6 tours as an Army combat engineer in Afghanistan, simply needed a quiet place to wait between her connecting flights from Qatar to her final destination in California. The airport lounge promised exactly what she needed: silence, coffee, Wi-Fi, and a place to sit without being surrounded by the chaos of delayed passengers and crying children. She had paid the day pass fee without complaint, her business class ticket from Qatar qualifying her for access to amenities that most travelers took for granted. After 18 hours of military transport flights and commercial connections, Mia was running on caffeine and determination, her body clock confused by multiple time zones, but her mind focused on the simple goal of getting home to her small apartment in San Diego. The lounge offered the kind of subdued atmosphere that appealed to business travelers and frequent flyers who valued comfort over cost. Leather chairs, dim lighting, and the quiet hum of air conditioning created an environment designed to help travelers recover from the stress of modern aviation. Mia entered with her military duffel bag and backpack, both showing the honest wear of someone who'd spent more time in combat zones than luxury hotels. She chose a corner table near the window, positioned where she could observe the departure gates while remaining relatively isolated from other passengers. Military habits died hard, especially the preference for situational awareness and easy escape routes that had kept her alive during countless missions in hostile territory. If you believe that service members deserve respect regardless of their appearance or circumstances, and that true heroism often goes unrecognized until someone chooses to see it, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about the quiet warriors who sacrifice everything for others. Mia pulled out a worn paperback novel and settled into the comfortable chair, grateful for the opportunity to decompress after weeks of high-stress operations in Qatar, where she'd been training local military personnel in explosive ordnance disposal techniques. The work had been important but exhausting, requiring constant vigilance in an environment where a single mistake could kill everyone in the immediate area. Her uniform showed the signs of extended field operations, dust stains that hadn't completely washed out, fabric worn soft from repeated use, and the kind of practical modifications that marked someone who prioritized function over appearance. The combat engineer insignia on her collar identified her specialization, though most civilians wouldn't recognize the significance of the crossed tools that represented one of the Army's most dangerous career fields. 20 minutes into her wait, a woman in an expensive business suit approached Mia's table with the confident stride of someone accustomed to authority in service industry environments. Her name tag identified her as Patricia Wells, lounge manager, and her expression suggested disapproval rather than hospitality. "Excuse me," Wells said, her voice carrying the polite firmness that customer service professionals used when delivering unwelcome news. "But this lounge is reserved for premium passengers only." Mia looked up from her book, her expression showing mild confusion rather than defensiveness. "I have a business class ticket from Qatar Airways. I paid the day pass fee at the desk when I entered." Wells glanced at Mia's uniform and military equipment with obvious distaste, her professional smile failing to mask personal judgment about appropriate lounge attire. "Yes, well, our dress code requires business casual at minimum. Military uniforms and backpacks aren't really suitable for the atmosphere we're trying to maintain here." A second employee, a young man whose expensive haircut and designer tie suggested management aspirations, approached to support his supervisor's position. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable waiting at the general departure gates," he suggested with the kind of condescending tone that implied Mia's presence was somehow inappropriate for the lounge's upscale clientele. Mia closed her book slowly, her movements showing the controlled patience of someone who'd learned to navigate institutional prejudice without losing composure. 6 years of military service had taught her that some battles weren't worth fighting, especially when victory would be Pyrrhic at best. "I understand," Mia said quietly, gathering her belongings without argument or protest. "Thank you for clarifying your policies." The other passengers in the lounge watched the interaction with the uncomfortable silence that marked people who recognized injustice but lacked the courage to intervene. Several had observed Mia's quiet behavior since her arrival, noting that she'd bothered no one and contributed nothing to any disturbance that might justify her removal. But none spoke in her defense as she walked toward the exit, carrying herself with the dignity that marked someone whose self-worth wasn't dependent on external validation or institutional recognition. Outside the lounge, Mia found an empty chair near a coffee vending machine, settling into the hard plastic seat with the adaptability that military service had taught her. Comfort was a luxury, not a requirement, and she'd spent enough nights sleeping on rocky ground or in cramped vehicles to appreciate any opportunity to rest while remaining vertical. She plugged her phone into a charging station and resumed reading, maintaining the same calm focus she displayed in the lounge despite being surrounded by the noise and chaos of general departure areas. Other passengers hurried past with the frantic energy of people whose schedules had been disrupted by weather and mechanical delays. A young girl, perhaps 8 years old, tugged on her mother's sleeve while pointing toward Mia. "Mommy, is she a soldier?" The mother glanced toward Mia's uniform, her expression showing the mixture of curiosity and uncertainty that many civilians felt when encountering military personnel in public spaces. "I don't know, sweetheart," the mother replied, steering her daughter away before any conversation could develop. Mia had grown accustomed to being simultaneously visible and invisible, recognizable as military but unknown as an individual, appreciated in theory but avoided in practice. People thanked veterans for their service while carefully maintaining distance from the personal cost of that service. What the passengers around her didn't know was that Captain Mia Tanaka carried more than travel fatigue and military equipment. She carried memories of operations where her expertise in explosive ordnance disposal had meant the difference between successful missions and catastrophic casualties. 3 years earlier, during her 4th deployment to Afghanistan, Mia had led a route clearance mission in Helmand Province where intelligence reports indicated widespread use of improvised explosive devices along a critical supply corridor. Her team's job was to identify and neutralize IEDs before convoys could be ambushed, work that required walking slowly through terrain where each step might trigger explosives designed to kill or maim anyone who found them. The mission had lasted 14 hours, with Mia personally identifying and disarming 17 separate explosive devices while under intermittent sniper fire from Taliban forces who understood that targeting the route clearance team would maximize damage to subsequent coalition operations. When an ambush finally materialized, Mia had found herself responsible for evacuating wounded soldiers through a minefield that she'd only partially cleared. Using techniques learned through years of training and combat experience, she'd guided 12 injured Americans to safety by marking safe passages with her own body positioning, creating human waypoints that allowed medics to reach casualties without triggering additional explosives. Every man on that mission had returned home alive, though 3 carried injuries that would affect them for the rest of their lives. Mia had been recommended for the Bronze Star with Combat V, but the decoration seemed insignificant compared to the knowledge that her skills had prevented a dozen families from receiving flag-folded notifications of their loved ones' deaths. But awards and commendations weren't visible to airport lounge managers who made judgments based on appearance rather than achievement. To Patricia Wells, Mia was simply a soldier whose presence might disturb business travelers who preferred their military service theoretical rather than personal. An hour into her wait at the departure gate, Mia noticed increased activity near the premium lounge she'd been asked to leave. Security personnel and airport officials were gathering in small groups, their body language suggesting anticipation of something significant. She paid little attention to the commotion, focusing instead on her book and the steady stream of departure announcements that indicated air traffic was slowly returning to normal schedules. Her own flight was still delayed, but the gate agents were expressing cautious optimism about departure within the next 2 hours. What Mia didn't know was that her ejection from the airport lounge had been witnessed by someone who recognized both the injustice and the opportunity to correct it. Sandra Martinez, a former Army medic who now worked as a passenger services coordinator at JFK, had observed the entire interaction between Mia and the lounge management. Sandra had served 2 tours in Iraq as a combat medic, and she knew the look of someone who'd carried responsibilities that most people couldn't comprehend. Mia's calm acceptance of dismissal spoke to the kind of discipline that came from facing far more serious challenges than corporate discrimination. Using her airport communications access, Sandra had sent a brief message to a contact she'd maintained since her military service, someone who would understand the significance of what she'd witnessed and possess the authority to respond appropriately. "Sir," Sandra's text message read, "she's here again. Tanaka." They kicked her out of the lounge. 3 miles away in Manhattan, retired four-star General Nathaniel Harper was reading that message while sitting in the back of a taxi, heading toward JFK International Airport. At 64, Harper maintained the bearing and physical fitness that had made him one of the Army's most respected field commanders, though he now wore civilian clothes rather than the uniform that had defined 4 decades of military service. Harper knew exactly who Tanaka was, and he knew exactly why Sandra Martinez had contacted him about her treatment at the airport. Captain Mia Tanaka had saved his life and the lives of 8 other soldiers during a mission in Afghanistan that officially had never happened, in a place that didn't appear on any published maps. The memory was as clear as if it had happened yesterday rather than 3 years ago. Harper's convoy had been ambushed while returning from a classified meeting with Afghan government officials, their vehicles disabled by roadside bombs that had turned a routine trip into a desperate fight for survival. With their communications equipment destroyed and casualties mounting, the situation had deteriorated rapidly until a lone figure appeared through the smoke and chaos. Captain Tanaka, whose route clearance team had heard the explosions and responded without waiting for official orders or backup support. Working under enemy fire, Mia had identified safe corridors through the remaining minefield while directing the evacuation of wounded soldiers to defensive positions that she'd cleared using portable explosive detection equipment. Her calm professionalism under extreme stress had enabled the rescue of all surviving personnel, including Harper himself, who'd been unconscious from blast injuries when Mia's team reached his position. "You're going to be fine, sir," Mia had told him as medics loaded him onto an evacuation helicopter. "Everyone's accounted for. Mission complete." Harper had been medically evacuated to Germany for treatment of traumatic brain injury and internal bleeding that had nearly killed him. During his month-long recovery, he learned that Captain Tanaka had refused any recognition for the rescue mission, citing operational security requirements that made public acknowledgement inappropriate. Now, 3 years later, Harper was reading a text message that told him Mia was being treated with disrespect by people who couldn't recognize the value of her service. The situation required immediate correction by someone with sufficient authority to ensure that the lesson would be remembered. "Driver," Harper said, leaning forward to address the taxi operator, "change of plans. JFK International, Terminal 4. And please hurry." The taxi accelerated through Manhattan traffic, while Harper considered how to address a situation that exemplified everything wrong with civilian attitudes toward military service. Mia Tanaka had risked her life to save others, had served her country with distinction in the most dangerous specialization the Army offered, and was now being dismissed from an airport lounge because her appearance didn't meet the aesthetic preferences of service industry management. The response would be educational for everyone involved. The premium lounge at JFK Terminal 4 had returned to its normal rhythm of subdued conversation and clicking laptop keyboards when the glass doors opened to admit someone whose presence immediately changed the atmosphere. General Nathaniel Harper entered with the measured stride of someone accustomed to command authority, his civilian clothes unable to disguise the military bearing that had been refined through 4 decades of leadership in increasingly responsible positions. At 64, Harper carried himself with the controlled confidence that marked successful senior officers, alert without being aggressive, authoritative without being arrogant. His gray hair was cut to military standards despite his retirement, and his posture suggested someone who remained physically fit enough for active duty despite his age. The lounge staff noticed him immediately, their customer service training recognizing someone whose bearing suggested importance even without obvious status indicators. Patricia Wells approached with the professional smile reserved for passengers whose appearance indicated premium treatment expectations. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to our lounge. How may we assist you today?" Harper surveyed the room methodically, his gaze taking in the comfortable seating areas, the business travelers working at laptops, and the bar where several passengers were enjoying complimentary drinks. His expression remained neutral, giving no indication of his purpose or intentions. "I'm looking for Captain Mia Tanaka," Harper said quietly, his voice carrying the authority that made people pay attention without requiring increased volume. Wells's professional smile faltered slightly as she recognized the name and recalled the earlier incident that had resulted in Mia's removal from the lounge. She left earlier. We had some policy concerns that required us to ask her to find alternative seating arrangements." Harper's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes made Wells take an involuntary step backward. Military officers learned early in their careers how to project authority through presence rather than words, and Harper had mastered that skill during operations where his credibility could determine whether subordinates followed orders in life-threatening situations. "Policy concerns," Harper repeated, his tone inviting elaboration rather than accepting explanation. "Our dress code requires business casual attire," Wells explained, her confidence diminishing as she realized she was dealing with someone who wouldn't be easily dismissed or redirected. "Military uniforms and tactical equipment aren't really appropriate for the atmosphere we maintain here." Harper nodded slowly, as if considering this explanation while formulating his response. The other passengers in the lounge had begun to notice the conversation, their attention drawn by Wells's obvious discomfort and Harper's commanding presence. "Miss Wells," Harper said, reading her name tag with deliberate precision. "Captain Tanaka is one of the most courageous combat engineers I've encountered during 4 decades of military service. 3 years ago, in Helmand Province, she led the evacuation of 9 wounded soldiers through an active minefield while under enemy fire." His voice remained conversational, but every word carried clearly through the lounge's quiet atmosphere. "She personally neutralized 17 improvised explosive devices during a 14-hour mission, then guided a medical evacuation through terrain that could have killed everyone involved if she'd made a single mistake in her calculations." Wells shifted uncomfortably as Harper continued, her administrative authority seeming increasingly insignificant compared to the military credentials he was describing. "Captain Tanaka saved my life and the lives of 8 other American soldiers during an operation that officially never happened, in a place that doesn't appear on any maps. She did this without waiting for orders, without backup support, and without any expectation of recognition or reward." Harper paused, allowing his words to sink in among the passengers who were now openly listening to the conversation instead of pretending to work or read. "So when you tell me that her appearance isn't appropriate for your lounge, I'm curious about what kind of appearance you believe is more appropriate than that of someone who's proven willing to die for strangers." The silence that followed was complete except for the quiet hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of airport announcements. Several passengers had begun recording the conversation with their phones, recognizing that they were witnessing something significant. Wells looked around the lounge for support from her colleagues, but found only uncomfortable expressions and avoided eye contact. Her training had prepared her for dealing with difficult customers, but not for confronting someone whose authority derived from life-and-death leadership rather than corporate hierarchy. "Sir, we didn't know about her military record. We were just following standard policies about appropriate attire." "Miss Wells, that's exactly the problem," Harper replied, his tone remaining calm but his message becoming increasingly pointed. "You saw a soldier in uniform and made assumptions about her worthiness based on your personal preferences rather than her demonstrated character." Harper gestured toward the lounge's comfortable seating and premium amenities. "This facility exists to provide comfort and convenience to travelers who've earned that comfort through their purchasing decisions. Captain Tanaka earned her comfort through 6 years of military service in the most dangerous specialization the Army offers, including multiple combat deployments where her expertise prevented American casualties." He stepped closer to Wells, his presence making her obvious discomfort even more apparent to the watching passengers. "So I'm going to ask you again, what kind of appearance do you believe is more appropriate for this lounge than that of a decorated combat veteran who's proven her commitment to serving others?" Wells opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again as she realized that any answer would only deepen her predicament. Harper's question wasn't really seeking information. It was forcing her to confront the moral implications of her earlier decision. I think there may have been a misunderstanding," Wells said finally, her professional training providing a face-saving response that acknowledged error without accepting full responsibility. There was no misunderstanding, Harper corrected firmly. There was discrimination against a service member based on superficial judgments about appropriate appearance. The question now is how you intend to address that discrimination. One of the passengers recording the conversation called out from his seat near the bar. "Excuse me, are you talking about the soldier they kicked out earlier? The one in the army uniform?" Harper turned toward the passenger, noting the man's expensive business attire and the kind of confident bearing that suggested corporate executive or high-level professional. "Yes, Captain Mia Tanaka, United States Army Corps of Engineers. Currently returning from a deployment in Qatar, where she was training Allied forces in explosive ordnance disposal techniques." "They kicked out a combat veteran?" another passenger asked, her voice showing the kind of outrage that Harper had hoped to generate. "While we're sitting here drinking free wine." The mood in the lounge was shifting rapidly as passengers began to understand the full implications of what they'd witnessed earlier. Several had noticed Mia's quiet presence and her subsequent removal, but had assumed it was a routine enforcement of dress code policies rather than discrimination against someone whose appearance reflected military service. "This is exactly the kind of story that needs to go viral," announced a young woman who'd been recording Harper's entire conversation. "Airline lounge kicks out war hero for looking too military." Wells realized that she was facing a public relations disaster that could damage both her personal career and her employer's reputation. Social media had made customer service failures into viral content that could generate millions of negative impressions within hours. "Sir, perhaps we could invite Captain Tanaka to return to the lounge as our guest," Wells suggested, clearly hoping to contain the situation before it escalated further. Harper smiled, the expression carrying no warmth but considerable satisfaction. "Miss Wells, Captain Tanaka is currently sitting beside a coffee vending machine because your policies prioritize appearance over character. I think it would be appropriate for you to personally invite her back and explain how your understanding of appropriate lounge clientele has evolved." As Wells hurried toward the lounge exit to find Mia, Harper accepted offers from several passengers to buy him drinks while they discussed military service and the treatment of veterans in civilian society. The conversation that had begun as correction of institutional discrimination was becoming an impromptu seminar on civil-military relations and the invisible sacrifices made by service members. Meanwhile, 20 yards away at Gate 23, Mia continued reading her paperback novel while waiting for departure announcements that would indicate her flight status. She'd grown accustomed to being excluded from spaces where other people felt entitled to comfort and recognition, and had learned to find contentment in simple activities that didn't require external validation. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her sister in California. "Flight still delayed? How's the airport treating you?" Mia typed back, "Fine. Delays happen. Should be boarding soon." She chose not to mention the lounge incident, partly because explaining it would require more emotional energy than she wanted to invest, and partly because she'd learned that complaining about discrimination rarely produced satisfactory resolutions. Better to focus on getting home than dwelling on the prejudices of people whose opinions didn't affect her mission or her self-worth. But her quiet acceptance of dismissal was about to be interrupted by recognition from someone who understood exactly what her service had cost and what her sacrifice had achieved. Patricia Wells approached Mia's seating area with the nervous energy of someone who was about to attempt damage control for a situation that had already spiraled beyond her ability to manage discreetly. "Captain Tanaka?" Wells said, her voice showing uncertainty about how to address someone whose military rank she'd dismissed earlier but was now being forced to acknowledge. Mia looked up from her book, her expression showing mild curiosity rather than anger or resentment. "Yes, there's been a misunderstanding about our earlier conversation. I'd like to invite you back to the lounge as our guest, with our sincere apologies for any inconvenience." Mia studied Wells's face, noting the kind of forced smile that customer service professionals wore when delivering scripted apologies that had been designed by corporate crisis management teams. "That's not necessary," Mia replied politely. "I'm comfortable here, and my flight should be boarding soon." Wells's nervous energy increased as she realized that Mia's gracious response was actually making the situation worse by highlighting the contrast between military professionalism and corporate prejudice. "Captain, There's someone in the lounge who specifically requested to see you. A General Harper? He said you served together. For the first time since the conversation began, Mia's expression changed. Her book closed automatically as her military training processed the name and its implications. General Nathaniel Harper, her former commanding officer. The man whose life she'd saved during an ambush that had nearly killed 9 American soldiers. What was he doing at JFK International Airport, and how had he learned about her presence at the terminal? General Harper is here? Mia asked, her voice showing the respect that junior officers maintained for senior commanders even years after their service relationships had ended. Yes, ma'am. He's waiting in the lounge and specifically asked to see you. Mia gathered her belongings with the efficient movements that marked someone whose military training had never entirely faded. If General Harper was at JFK and wanted to see her, then something significant was happening that transcended airport lounge policies and customer service protocols. Lead the way, Mia said simply, following Wells back toward the premium lounge where her military past was about to collide with her civilian present in ways that neither she nor the watching passengers could anticipate. Mia entered the premium lounge for the second time that evening, but the atmosphere had transformed completely from her earlier experience. Instead of suspicious glances and administrative hostility, she encountered respectful attention from passengers who rose from their seats as she passed, their body language showing the kind of recognition typically reserved for celebrities or dignitaries. At the center of the lounge, General Harper stood beside a comfortable seating area, his presence commanding attention without requiring effort. When he saw Mia approaching, his expression shifted from authority to genuine warmth. The look of a commander greeting a soldier whose competence and courage had earned unqualified respect. Captain Tanaka, Harper said, extending his hand with the formal courtesy that marked military relationships based on mutual professional regard. General Harper, Mia replied, accepting the handshake while maintaining the respectful bearing that junior officers showed their former commanders regardless of time or circumstances. Harper gestured toward 2 chairs positioned to provide privacy for conversation while remaining visible to the other passengers who were openly watching their interaction. Please sit. I took the liberty of ordering coffee, black, no sugar, if I remember your preferences correctly. Mia settled into the chair with obvious relief, finally able to relax in an environment where her presence was welcomed rather than merely tolerated. The coffee was excellent, far superior to the vending machine alternative she'd been consuming at the departure gate. Sir, may I ask what brings you to JFK this evening? Harper smiled, the expression carrying both professional satisfaction and personal warmth. You do, Captain. Someone I trust informed me that you were being treated with less respect than you deserve. I came to correct that situation. Mia felt a familiar combination of gratitude and embarrassment that accompanied recognition she'd never sought and didn't feel she'd earned. General, the lounge situation was just a misunderstanding about dress codes. Nothing that required your personal intervention. Captain, it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was discrimination against a decorated combat veteran by people who couldn't recognize the value of military service. That kind of discrimination requires correction by someone with sufficient authority to ensure the lesson is remembered. Harper leaned forward slightly, his tone becoming more personal while remaining respectful of their former command relationship. Mia, you saved my life and the lives of 8 other soldiers during that ambush in Helmand. You did it without orders, without backup, and without any expectation of recognition. The least I can do is ensure that you receive appropriate treatment when traveling through civilian facilities. The conversation was being recorded by multiple passengers, their phones capturing an interaction that would soon transform into viral social media content. But both Harper and Mia were focused on each other rather than their audience. 2 professionals whose shared military experience transcended the civilian environment surrounding them. Sir, I was just doing my job. Any combat engineer would have responded the same way. Captain, that's exactly what makes you special. You think saving 9 lives under enemy fire is routine duty rather than extraordinary heroism. That's the kind of humility that defines the best soldiers I've served with. Harper paused, noting that their conversation was attracting increasing attention from passengers and airport staff who recognized they were witnessing something significant. But humility shouldn't prevent you from receiving the respect you've earned. And it certainly shouldn't allow civilians to dismiss you based on superficial judgments about appropriate appearance. Patricia Wells approached their seating area with obvious nervousness, carrying a formal letter and wearing the expression of someone who'd been instructed to deliver scripted corporate communications. Captain Tanaka, General Harper, I wanted to personally apologize again for this evening's misunderstanding. Management has asked me to present you with a formal letter of apology and a voucher for complimentary lounge access during any future travel. Harper accepted the letter without reading it, his attention remaining focused on Wells rather than the corporate damage control language she was delivering. Miss Wells, what steps is your company taking to ensure that other veterans don't experience similar discrimination? Wells consulted notes she'd obviously been given by supervisors who were monitoring the situation remotely. We're implementing immediate sensitivity training for all customer service staff, with specific emphasis on recognizing and appropriately serving military personnel. We're also reviewing our dress code policies to ensure they don't inadvertently exclude service members in uniform. And Harper prompted, clearly expecting more comprehensive response. We're establishing a new program called Quiet Wings, a dedicated area in our premium lounges specifically designed to honor veterans and active duty personnel. Comfortable seating, complimentary services, and an environment that recognizes their service to our country. Harper nodded approvingly, recognizing institutional change that would benefit veterans beyond this specific incident. Miss Wells, that's exactly the kind of response that transforms mistakes into meaningful improvements. Captain Tanaka's experience will now contribute to better treatment for thousands of other veterans. As Wells returned to her duties, Harper and Mia continued their conversation while passengers around them gradually returned to their own activities. The immediate crisis had been resolved through institutional changes, but the personal reconnection between former comrades continued. General, how did you learn about what happened here tonight? Sandra Martinez, one of the passenger services coordinators. Former Army medic, served 2 tours in Iraq. She recognized what was happening and contacted me because she knew we'd served together. Harper pulled out his phone and showed Mia a text message. Sir, she's here again. Tanaka. They kicked her out of the lounge. Sandra maintains an informal network of veterans working throughout the airport system. When she sees military personnel being mistreated, she reaches out to people who can provide appropriate intervention. Mia felt a familiar warmth that came from discovering unexpected connections to military community in civilian environments. I should thank her before I leave. She's working the departure gates tonight. I'll make sure you have a chance to connect before your flight boards. Their conversation was interrupted by boarding announcements for Mia's flight to San Diego, the mechanical voice providing information about departure gates and boarding procedures that would finally allow her to complete her journey home. That's me, Mia said, gathering her belongings with the efficient movements that marked someone whose travel experience included military deployments and emergency relocations. Harper stood as well, his military courtesy automatic despite the civilian environment. Captain, it's been an honor serving with you again, even in these circumstances. Sir, thank you for coming. You didn't have to intervene, but I'm grateful that you did. Harper extended his hand for a final handshake, then surprised Mia by offering something more personal. Mia, I want you to understand something. What you did in Helmand, what you've continued doing throughout your military career, that matters more than airport lounge policies or civilian prejudices. Don't let anyone make you feel like your service is anything less than heroic. As Mia walked toward her departure gate, she was approached by Sandra Martinez, the former Army medic whose intervention had set the evening's events in motion. Sandra was perhaps 45, with the competent bearing of someone whose military medical training had prepared her for high-stress civilian careers. Captain Tanaka, I'm Sandra Martinez. I wanted to apologize for what happened earlier and thank you for your service. Sandra, General Harper told me you contacted him. Thank you for caring enough to get involved. Captain, we take care of our own. Always have, always will. The two veterans walked together toward the departure gate, their conversation covering shared experiences of military service and civilian transition that created instant connection despite never having served together directly. At the gate, Mia's flight was finally boarding, with passengers forming lines according to their ticket classifications and frequent flyer status. But as Mia approached the boarding tunnel, something unexpected happened. The pilot, a woman in her 50s wearing the four-stripe uniform of a commercial airline captain, emerged from the aircraft to greet passengers personally. When she saw Mia approaching in her army uniform, the pilot's expression changed to one of professional recognition and personal respect. "Captain Tanaka," the pilot asked, reading Mia's name tape. "I'm Captain Jennifer Walsh, former Air Force. Welcome aboard." Captain Walsh rendered a crisp military salute that Mia returned automatically, their brief exchange representing the kind of mutual recognition that connected military service across branches and generations. Other passengers witnessing the interaction began applauding spontaneously, their appreciation spreading through the boarding area as people recognized they were seeing military professionals acknowledge each other's service. Mia accepted the recognition with characteristic grace, nodding her thanks while moving quickly toward her seat to avoid prolonging attention she'd never sought and didn't entirely comfortable receiving. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate and began its taxi toward the runway, Mia settled into her window seat and reflected on an evening that had begun with discrimination and ended with recognition. The contrast illustrated both the challenges and opportunities that veterans faced in civilian society: prejudice from those who couldn't understand military service, but also support from those who did. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her sister. "Saw the video online. You're famous. So proud of you." Mia looked out the aircraft window at the lights of New York fading below, thinking about the viral social media content that would soon transform her personal experience into public conversation about veteran rights and civilian responsibilities. She wasn't comfortable with fame, but understood that her story might help other veterans receive better treatment from people who learned to recognize the value of military service. Sometimes individual experiences had to become public examples in order to create institutional change that benefited entire communities. 3 weeks later, Mia received a letter from JFK International Airport informing her that the Quiet Wings program had been implemented across all premium lounges, with dedicated areas for military personnel and veterans seeking respectful accommodation during their travels. The letter included photographs of the new facilities, comfortable seating areas with military service branch insignia, complimentary refreshments, and plaques honoring the sacrifices made by men and women who'd served their country in uniform. "The Quiet Wings program exists because your experience taught us that respect should be based on character rather than appearance," the letter concluded. "Thank you for your service, and thank you for helping us become worthy of the veterans we're privileged to serve." Mia filed the letter alongside her other military correspondence, recognizing it as evidence that individual experiences could sometimes create changes that benefited entire communities. Her uncomfortable evening at JFK had become an opportunity for institutional learning that would improve treatment for thousands of future veteran travelers. But the most meaningful outcome wasn't the corporate policy changes or social media recognition. It was the reunion with General Harper, the connection with Sandra Martinez, and the reminder that military brotherhood continued long after uniforms were retired. Some victories, Mia had learned, weren't achieved through combat operations or explosive ordnance disposal. They were achieved through the willingness of good people to stand up for what was right, even when doing so required personal courage and institutional confrontation. 6 months after the JFK incident, Mia was approached by a documentary filmmaker who wanted to create a feature about veterans' experiences in civilian society. The project would examine how military service members navigated post-deployment transitions and civilian perceptions of their contributions. "Captain Tanaka, your airport lounge story has become symbolic of broader issues affecting veteran communities," the filmmaker explained during their initial meeting. "People are using it to discuss respect, recognition, and the invisible challenges that service members face when returning to civilian life." Mia considered the request carefully, weighing her natural preference for privacy against the potential benefits of sharing experiences that might help other veterans receive better treatment. "I'll participate if the focus remains on systemic issues rather than personal heroism," Mia said finally. "This isn't about me. It's about how society treats the people who serve it." The documentary, titled Quiet Wings: The Hidden Service of American Veterans, premiered at film festivals nationwide and generated conversations about civilian responsibilities toward military communities. Mia's story became one of several examples illustrating how veterans continued serving their country through civilian careers while often receiving less recognition than they deserved. But the most significant impact wasn't media attention or public recognition. It was the network of veteran support that had grown from Sandra Martinez's simple decision to contact General Harper when she witnessed discrimination against a fellow service member. The informal veteran communication network at JFK had expanded to include airports across the country, with former military personnel in customer service positions maintaining contact systems that ensured rapid response when veterans faced unfair treatment during travel. It's not about special privileges, Sandra explained during one of the documentary interviews. It's about basic respect for people who've proven their commitment to serving others. When civilians understand what military service actually requires, they usually respond appropriately. General Harper, who had become a frequent advocate for veteran rights in civilian institutions, used his airport intervention as an example during speeches to corporate executives and government officials. Leadership requires recognizing value in people regardless of their appearance or circumstances, Harper would tell audiences. Captain Tanaka looked like a tired soldier in a wrinkled uniform, but she was actually a decorated combat veteran whose expertise had saved American lives. The question each organization must answer is whether their policies help them recognize that value or prevent them from seeing it. 2 years after the JFK incident, Mia received an invitation to speak at the airport's annual Veterans Day ceremony, where the Quiet Wings program was being expanded to include educational displays about military service and veteran transition resources. Standing in the same terminal where she'd once been asked to leave a premium lounge, Mia addressed an audience of airport employees, travelers, and military families who'd gathered to honor veterans' contributions to American society. Military service teaches you that some battles are worth fighting not because you expect to win, but because the principles at stake are more important than personal comfort, Mia said, her voice carrying clearly through the terminal's main concourse. What happened here 2 years ago wasn't really about airport lounges or dress codes. It was about whether we as a society choose to see the value in people who've dedicated their lives to serving others. She gestured toward the Quiet Wings area, where comfortable seating and educational displays created a space that honored military service while providing practical support for traveling veterans. This facility exists because people chose to act when they witnessed injustice. General Harper could have ignored a text message about discrimination against someone he'd served with. Sandra Martinez could have minded her own business when she saw a veteran being mistreated. Instead, they chose to use their influence and authority to create positive change. Mia paused, looking out at faces that included both veterans and civilians who were learning to recognize the ongoing impact of military service on American communities. The most important lesson isn't about how veterans should be treated, though we certainly deserve respect for our service. The most important lesson is about how all of us can choose to stand up for what's right when we witness injustice, regardless of whether it affects us personally. The applause that followed was sustained and meaningful, but Mia's attention was drawn to a young soldier in the audience who approached her after the ceremony. "Ma'am, I'm Private First Class Johnson, flying home on leave. I wanted to thank you for what you did here and for what you said today." "Private Johnson, what's your MWS?" "Combat Engineer, ma'am. Explosive Ordnance Disposal. Just finished training at Fort Leonard Wood." Mia smiled, recognizing the mixture of pride and nervousness that marked new soldiers entering one of the military's most dangerous career fields. "EOD is important work, Private. People's lives will depend on your expertise and attention to detail. Are you ready for that responsibility?" "Yes, ma'am. I hope to serve with the same honor you've shown." As Private Johnson returned to his departure gate, Mia reflected on the cyclical nature of military service and veteran advocacy. Her airport experience had become a teaching moment not just about civilian respect for veterans, but about the ongoing responsibility that service members had to support each other across generations and career fields. The Quiet Wings program continued to expand, with similar facilities being established at airports nationwide. Corporate training programs used Mia's story as a case study in recognizing hidden value in customers and employees whose backgrounds might not be immediately apparent. But for Mia personally, The most meaningful outcome was the knowledge that her experience had contributed to better treatment for other veterans navigating the sometimes difficult transition between military service and civilian recognition. As she prepared to board her own flight home to San Diego, Mia passed through the quiet wings area where other veterans were taking advantage of the comfortable seating and respectful service that had grown from one woman's determination to contact someone who could address institutional discrimination. A small plaque near the entrance read, "Dedicated to all who serve quietly, and to those who ensure their service is never forgotten." Some heroes, Mia had learned, wore uniforms and served in combat zones. Others wore civilian clothes and worked in airports, recognizing injustice and taking action to correct it. The best heroes, she realized, simply did what needed to be done when it needed to be done, without expecting recognition or reward beyond the satisfaction of knowing they'd made the world a little more just for the people who came after them.